Welcome to OSM, Operation Safe Mode. Peace be with you. In these times we trust in Jesus, and many people realize that our base is always going to be in His trust. Our base is always going to be that He will give us His mercy. It's in Him that safe mode in difficult times allows us to have the comfort of His love. And that's kind of what my t-shirt says here, that God is my homie. It's the place that I want to be. Home with the Lord here and home with Him in heaven. So when we address the fact of sin, we have to realize there's different kinds of sin that we must manage and be able to reflect on in regards to a good act of contrition before we enter into bed to relax ourselves for a night's sleep, waiting for the next morning to begin again in the Lord. The first kind is that we've addressed is sins of thought. Now remember, there's a difference between a thought coming into our mind that is not one that we're seeking, almost like a subliminal message, that we need to leave those go through. Try not to think of them or use a trigger to change it, like cucumber or watermelon, to get it out of our heads. But remember that sins of thought only become true when we desire the very thing that we're tempted for. Now we think about it and we dwell upon it and imagine it being what we want above all other things. That can be a sin. Even if we don't act upon it, it's something that we entertained that takes us away from the presence of God. The second kind of sin, obviously, is sin of action. Now remember that sins of actions are displayed in anger, jealousy, pride. Sins of action are always about us. We act in a way in order to better who we are in the presence of others or in our own minds, or to make an advantage in our situation. Those sins of action are many, and we know them well. Another kind of sin that we forget about too often is sins of omission. And the times that we don't act, we didn't do anything wrong, but we didn't act in an opportunity of charity. A sin of omission would be when somebody speaks in a way that is eloquent or expresses faith, and we hear it and we say, wow, but we don't tell them, you moved me. You made me feel closer to Christ. You know, that was a wonderful homily, or that was a wonderful story that you shared. Sins of omission can be on the other side, that when someone speaks ill of another person, that we don't speak up on their behalf. Sins of omission can be that we choose not to act out of charity, to address the success of someone or even their need in poverty. The last kind of sin that I think that we have to be aware of is habitual sin. Habitual sin is probably the worst sin because we excuse it over and over again. I mentioned this once before in an OSM video that we all say, hey, everybody has to have a vice. No, you don't. That means you're accepting the one part of weakness of your character and allowing it to continue while you tend to the rest of the garden. It'd be like planting a garden and be yet using the opportunity to grow great things while allowing all the animals to run through it and eat it. You can't have those habitual sins. Habitual sins are things such as using bad language, or using God's name in vain, or eating too much, or rewarding ourselves with a gluttonous end of the day. Or habitual sins could be gambling. It could be pornography. They could be alcohol. Things that lead to what we call addictions begin simply as bad habits. So how do we control bad habits? I think it's controlled by the reality of calling ourselves to mind of that particular sin, not to allow it to continue unchecked. For instance, if you're in a habit of using foul language, listen more carefully to yourself. Think of it as in a way of who is hearing me? Why am I using this language? Am I impressing someone? Am I scandalizing them? Would I say those words and kiss my own mother with those same lips? You know the sayings. But it's true. We have to hear ourselves or experience ourselves. If it always follows with an excuse, then you know that you're falling into a habit. Here's a thought. What is the difference between habit and discipline? As a German, it's very black and white to me. All the things that I do. Things that are negative are habits. They're bad habits. And good habits, we call them disciplines. Why? Because what is good and right in the presence of others and in God is an act above and beyond our own selfishness, and it's an act of humility. It's difficult. That's why it's a discipline. But when you have a discipline, it becomes just as easy to do what is right than to do what is wrong. For instance, keeping the Sabbath holy. Right now, we have so many ways to be excused from coming to Sunday Mass. We can say, hey, I'm still afraid, which is true. There's anxiety there. But do we take serious watching Mass on TV? Do we take seriously making a spiritual communion? Do we allow Sunday to still be centered around the sacred scriptures and the awe and wonder of God's love? We all know that when we get in the habit of going to Sunday Mass, it's just as easy as not going. But it's a discipline because it takes away our will and enters God's will so that we may become more like Him. Remember, we're made in His image, and that image is safe through baptism. We become His likeness when we overcome our own selfishness, our own sins, our own bad habits, through His grace and mercy, and then we live truly in joy. So remember that sin will always challenge us to fall away from God. In the most difficult times and our most difficult struggles, we know we're being forged into the image and likeness of God, and that is where sainthood begins. So, stay safe in the Lord, and remember, His mercy will endure forever.